I never get what I want.
Let's chat about what you want to chat about, Chris.
Well, let's do all the things you want to do. Okay, I want to do a Season 6A retrospective. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I am...
Wait, no, that can't be. All right.
Why? Why not?
Sal, what are your thoughts on the economy?
Well, I don't know who Sal is because I'm a new listener on this podcast and I don't know what you're talking about.
No one starts with the 6A retrospective as their first episode.
Well, but we haven't introduced Sal on the podcast yet.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah, we didn't tell
That is true. Our Patreon subscribers know who Sal is.
Oh, they do.
But that is it. But that is one of the privileges of being a Patreon. So you should go to patreon.com/TheSopranosPodcast and subscribe for all the latest hot breaking information. But that little coo you just heard was baby Sal. Lily and I had a baby. So for the dozens of emails we got this season asking why the episodes were delayed, you're hearing it. That's why. Sorry we didn't tell you sooner, but we wanted to wait to the retrospective. And also, we've been a little busy. But I'm Chris D'Amato.
I'm Lily D'Amato.
I'm Paul Mancini.
And I'm Jordan Hugh.
And we are here, everybody, for the 6A retrospective. Are you all as happy as I am?
As happy to be here? Yes. As happy that there's no more 6A? No.
Oh, well, yeah, of course. Every episode we watch is one more that is behind us.
I'm a little bummed, actually, because we only have 6B left. And this podcast has been like a very significant thing in my life for years, in all our lives, right?
Well,
it's true.
One of the listener mails is going to ask us about what comes next, so maybe we'll save it for then. But
a succulent Chinese meal is what comes next.
What is the charge? That was Junior getting taken out of the house after members only. Eating a meal, a succulent Italian meal. Cazzare Valanga. Paul, how you doing?
Good. I get to come back and eat crow again. When Chris and I first became friends in 2014, we immediately bonded on Sopranos, and at some point I told him that I felt that 6A was a bit of a dip on the show, and Chris said, Paul, I want to ask you to give 6A another shot at some point, which I did long before we even talked about recording a podcast on it. And I really came around on it. It's become one of my favorite parts of the show. It might replace season 4 for me as the bravest the show ever was in taking chances, telling different kinds of stories, even ones that I struggle with a bit and don't like as much. I still think I would commend 6A overall for just David Chase and the gang absolutely refusing to repeat themselves, doing different things, doing new things with old characters so that the characterization doesn't get stale, and I'm continually surprised by it, and I have mostly just nice things to say about it, so excited to talk about it.
Yeah. Sorry. Just getting my notes. Don't stop recording.
Don't stop recording. We have clearly stopped recording. Chris, edit this part out. We provided no content in the space you were gone. You now have to edit it.
So 6A, it delighted, it surprised. I know that fans online are mixed about it. I think most Sopranos fans have come around to it over the years, but there is still a lot of folks who feel like it was maybe a little too out there, or they didn't like a certain element or two of it.
There's still a lot of dumb people out there.
I agree.
But overall, where do we feel 6A at this point fits into the legacy of the show, comparing it to other seasons, and just a sort of gut reaction to 6A, all said and done. And I'm going to add an addendum onto that. In addition to your thoughts on 6A overall, do you feel it functions on its own as a season? Or does this feel incomplete? Does 6B, which we haven't watched yet in theory, does it feel like we need 6B to get any kind of closure? Or does 6A as a 12-episode unit function as a season?
That's an interesting question. Well, the thing I would say is this. If I were to say to a Sopranos fan, maybe not a diehard fan, maybe a casual but loving Sopranos fan, wow, I really love season 6A, I think there's a good shot you're going to get hit with 3 things where they'll tell you, as Paul said, maybe there was a dip, right? The first is that the episodes are uneven, right, is something they're going to say. maybe. Another thing they might say is that it has an unusual or an underwhelming finale. And the other thing they may say is that it did not handle the Vito gay mobster storyline very well. That's right, Sal. For me, I just fundamentally disagree with most of those. I don't find the episodes uneven. I really like most of these episodes, and even the ones I like a little bit less, it's not because the episodes are bad, it's just they don't capture my interest in the same way. I love the finale of this season. I think Aisha is a really strong episode. We'll talk more about that. As for the Vito gay mobster storyline, it's actually not that I think so much that it's poorly handled. I just will echo Paul's past sentiments that I think Joe Ganiscoli is sometimes not up to the task, but I was still interested in the story. And that's where I'm at with that. Do I feel like the season stands on its own? I may not have the same opinion as the rest of you. I don't. I don't think it stands on its own, but not because the season's bad. I just think it works best as the fulcrum by which we're going to get 6B. I think Members Only opens in a very specific way, and very specific things happen in that episode for setup. And then I think also this degenerative quality that the whole season has is really important to be able to set up what I imagine is going to be a very dark 6B. And just kind of floating off by itself, it doesn't have a lot of great one-off episodes. I don't know. I say no, but not to take anything away from 6A, which I adored.
Well, that's an interesting point. There is no Pine Barrens. One you could just pluck out on its own and watch. That is an interesting quality to it. But I also agree with you that... Thank you, Sal. I also agree with you that it works very well episode to episode.
This kid wants to be on mic, I'm saying.
Yeah, it tells a great story, but it may not, as a full thing, because it starts off with a trauma and then goes from that trauma into Tony going through this transformative experience, and then a degeneration from there. Like, can he withhold it? Yeah. Can everything hold? It doesn't quite get to the point you feel like it's getting to, right? It does have this slow, poetic, disintegrative quality, but it never quite gets to where it feels like it is all going. And in that sense, It is not necessarily a complete season unto itself. But that's not to say I wasn't satisfied by the journey here. Does that make sense, Paul?
Yes. Is it because there's no such thing as closure? Is that part of where we're going with this? The movie doesn't end; it just goes on and on and on. Now,
that's foreshadowing.
Why in like the opening episode and the closing episode of 6A both do the same thing? They open and close with the same song. In the first episode, it's the Seven Souls thing.
Yeah.
In the last episode, it's Midnight Mile. Something may be deliberate here in that we're looping. We're repeating old mistakes. Not in uninteresting ways, in weird, new, dynamic ways. But yeah, it's weird, it's interesting, it is surprising. Not necessarily because the energy ratchets up, sometimes surprising because it slows down and it's a bit more reflective. Particularly now, I love all that stuff. And I love that they were trying new things. As far as it standing on its own, I guess not, but... And I have to be careful here with how much I say because I want to stay away from spoilers for 6B. Sure. But I would say I think the success of 6A and 6B, or 6 and 7 if you call them, if you want to look at them that way, is that they obey no rules from the other ones. They become more serialized. They become more individual. They become darker in a way. They become, I think, more abstract in some ways. If they didn't do that, then The Sopranos would not still be talked about the way that it is. Because even a really, really good show could do a rock everything to sleep ending, but more or less it would be criticized, I'd say, for doing what's expected. The Sopranos never did.
I think The Sopranos has always kind of subverted what we think of narrative episodic storytelling, and so this is no different. Is it a standalone season? As long as it's not the last one. You know, it is building to something else. We couldn't end where we ended. I don't know. I suppose not, but I would entertain an argument that it is. It's just that you have to kind of not expect a big shootout or a big thing to happen, right? But to Paul's point, it's just kind of a lot of people making repeat mistakes, which I thought you put that very well, Paul.
We get a lot of 6A that seems to have more in common with Northern Exposure or Twin Peaks than it does with Goodfellas or something like that. You know, this is more existential, abstract drama, a lot of it anyway, than it is a mob thing. And I think that's really tough for some fans to swallow.
Yeah, I agree. And also, it's structurally, it's just bizarre. Because just looking at it as a writer, you establish normalcy, and then you take off from there. Your season hits a climax, and then you have the falling action. And that's been despite the fact that they have thrown some cool kinks in the formula here and there, because they have to. It's episodic television going over multiple years. They start where most seasons of a TV show would end. Most TV shows out there would say, oh, our main character's getting shot, and we don't know the fate of this character. Well, they're going to have to wait for the next season to find out what that is. But no, they open right up with it. They drop it right in your face in episode 1, and they leave you with a cliffhanger, but you're going to get at least some answer to what happened next week. And I just thought that was so cool to start with something like that and then end on a place of quote-unquote normalcy or tranquility, where we're slowly getting back from a trauma rather than building to one. What an interesting way to approach the structure of your season. Again, as Paul said, ballsy, brave. I don't know that whatever you think of 6A, whether it's your cup of tea or not, or whatever individual episodes you like or don't, you can't take it away from the Sopranos writing staff that this was a ballsy 12 episodes of television. And
For sure.
you got to admire that. It's not everyone has the freedom to do that, unfortunately, in the television landscape. But it speaks to the creative balls of David Chase and company.
I guess Matthew Weiner started on the show in season 5 before going off on his own and doing Mad Men, and perhaps it was somewhere in 6A. He and David Chase had a discussion, and Matthew Weiner said that David Chase said to him, our ability to continue to make this show work is directly correlated to our ability to surprise the audience. And that insight that he was right about and that they acted on seemed to really work in the show's favor, in a place where a lot of shows really struggle, even good shows and even really good shows. You get to season 6 and things are starting to, you're feeling like Bilbo Baggins, like butter spread over too much bread. But not The Sopranos. Never. I never wavered on this show, by the way. I didn't always love the Vito storyline or struggle with the coma sequence. I never missed an episode. Ever.
Yeah. How do we feel about the role of Tony? I want to pitch this more as a question than as
Who's
an opinion.
Tony?
Tony Soprano, the main character.
I remember him.
The guy Tony down the street who makes my meatball sub.
Hey.
We could talk about him if you want to.
Who is he? Where's he going?
He's 44 years old, you know. I don't know how he got from selling patio furniture to precision fiber optics. But
This is as good a place to start as any for me. I'll say it, and then we'll probably go from there. Chris, you have smartly set up this idea that in each season we seem to have some question of Tony. In the first one, son and surrogate son, and it goes from there, leader, partner, brother, father figure. This season, 6A, the best I could come up with is Tony as question mark.
Yeah.
Who is Tony?
Yes.
Right? It's hard, Sal. It's a hard question.
That's just it. Who am I? Where am I going? That's the question he asks in episode 2. It speaks to the fact that 6A is a much more philosophical season. It's a much it deals with much larger and more complicated themes. We've sort of seen Tony, and we're in our last season, quote unquote last season. It's two-parter, but it's time to start asking the big questions. What is this all about? What is the story we're trying to tell here? Who is this guy really? And to what degree do his circumstances and criminality dictate his destiny? But I have the same answer, even though it's sort of a non-answer. It's just Tony as individual in the universe. What are we learning? What have we learned? Who is he? Does it matter?
Yeah, Tony almost feels, in his encounters with life and death in this season, there's more of a universality to Tony, I feel like, than there's ever been before, right? We will all experience or come to experience some idea of passing on, right? Whether it's going to be someone close to us, our own experience with this. Tony is... his experience with life and death in the early part of this season, it's not unique to him being Tony. So suddenly he's just kind of blank, and that's interesting because we're no longer dealing with him just being Tony. We're dealing with okay, we pass on and what happens and what do we leave behind and what impression does that leave on us if we come back? It's been such a fascinating journey this season. Watch Tony come back from his lowest point, from being basically dead, to having this great appreciation for life, to again being bored with life, and then returning back to his old ways. It feels incredibly real, it feels sad, and it feels important. All those things.
I think a little bit about, I'm going to do my theater nerd thing here, but I'm thought of in your talking about this of the song Giants in the Sky from Into the Woods. It's like he's been on this journey, but he's now he's different and he wishes that he could kind of live in between. It's he once was this one person. He's been on this journey. He's now maybe this other person now, but or maybe just trying to go back, but there's something different inside of him, and there is no in between. That moment when he's kind of at home resting and every day's a gift and all of that, but then he slowly realizes through Mr. and Mrs. John Sacramone Presents and what's his face Arabiata, and having to feel the need to beat him up and all of that. It's I have to go back to where I was, but I am also different in some ways too, but I have to be the same if I'm going to survive.
Yeah. It's also, how do you go back to the way you were before? You can't, you've seen too much.
Well, and now that we're at the end point, I think it's safe to say that I ended up being proven right in my assessment that Tony's newfound philosophy coming out of that coma, as beautiful an idea as it is, that everything is everything and we're all connected, that doesn't work when you're brutalizing and victimizing people left and right, because if we're all connected, you're bringing that pain right back on yourself in some way, and unfortunately, we are watching what Jordan and Paul described as a poetic disintegration and the return to old habit. And it's, Tony, there is something that seems through a lot of this season more soft and even more gentle, dare I say, about Tony. But at the same time, we started to see some of the threads coming loose at the end of the season. He did a shocking thing in the episode Johnny Cakes, where he didn't end up sleeping with Juliana. And then by the end of the season, he's getting the blowjob, which he maybe could write up, well, it's a stripper, it's a blowjob, or whatever.
Then he's seeing a prostitute at one point.
Correct.
And then he is trying to get Juliana.
Yeah. Correct, yeah. So it's return to form, and I don't know. Maybe the fact that he's had so much time to look inward may end up making him worse. But
well, one of the things I really enjoy about this series has been hey, you bring these characters who are fundamentally working class people, and you bring them into these rooms that they would not be in normally. Museums, Paris, a psychiatrist's office, right? Suddenly these normal people are encountering higher-minded things, and they have, higher-powered tools with which to look at their own selves, and you think, will this improve their lives in some way? And thus far the answer has actually been no. They have a greater understanding of their lives, perhaps, but it seems they are powerless to actually make any change for good. So actually, having some high-mindedness and some knowledge, I guess those things are objectively good in a way, but actually in terms of how they're put to use, at least in Soprano land, it almost doesn't matter.
I agree, yeah. I think any philosophy is only as good as the person using it.
Yeah.
In season 5, we talked about, remember the women did the movie club and they watched Citizen Kane. And I think Jordan said, this is a really interesting question. Why? There's a scene in Citizen Kane after Charles Foster Kane has consolidated these newspapers and he has a bunch more power. And two of his underlings, Bernstein and Jedediah, are talking in this window, near this window pane, and the reflection of Kane in the window dancing at his party, his big victory. Jedediah is upset. Bernstein says, what's wrong? And they're talking about what will happen now that he has all this power. And Bernstein says, don't worry about it, Jed. Kane will change these men. And Jedediah says, that's not what I'm worried about. What I'm worried about is how these men will change him. And after Tony gets shot and is brought very low and weak bodily, I think his sense of how he is perceived becomes more sensitive. He becomes more like Junior after Junior shoots him. He becomes more sensitive about the fear of weakness, I think. And I think that becomes a major complication even as he tries to improve.
Sure. Case in point, Perry. Beating up Perry. It's a big moment of that. That's a huge thing, too.
Last question about this, and then we're going to go on to our first top three. Set up for 6B. How do we feel this season sets us up going into what we even knew at the time was going to be the final chapter of the Sopranos saga? It was known at the time that if there was going to be more after this batch of 12 episodes, that was going to be it. Everybody was very clear. HBO, Chase, and there were even some contractual issues that questioned whether some characters would even be returning. So just looking at where we are at the end of this thing, how do we feel right now as a story? Like, what with it, trying not to look too far ahead or get into spoiler territory, what do we think 6B is set up for, and how do we think 6A did setting it up for the final act?
Sure. Well, going big to small, heading into 6B, we're at war with New York, or we're about to be. So that's the big setting. In terms of Tony's operation, you have guys that are... I wouldn't say there's any shifting loyalties yet, because we don't know the extent of what the war is going to do, but we have a Christopher who is much more erratic and much less reliable, who has fallen back into addiction, which will probably lead to a more contentious relationship with Tony, which seems to be building. Tony has a big AJ problem, because AJ seems to have destabilized and is doing some new things as well. We don't know what this whole Blanca situation is going to be. AJ is totally lost in the wind. And then all the way in, Tony himself. I don't know what he wants out of all this. I don't know what his new sense of himself is going to bring him. I think the war may focus him in some ways, but also I don't know if he's prepared to do what war needs him to do. I don't know. I'm curious. I don't remember 6B that well. 6B, unlike a couple of these past seasons we've been watching, I saw much of 6B, not early 6B. So I remember some of the big stuff at the end. No spoilers. But I forget how we get there. I'm interested to see it.
Yeah, I mean, the just to piggyback on what you said about the Christopher-Tony relationship, that's really disintegrating, particularly with Kaisha, but we also see the flashback of him telling Tony about Adriana.
It does feel like Tony and Chris is going to be a big thrust of 6B at this point. And
we've always talked about, like, who is Tony's successor, and we've always kind of said it was Christopher's his best bet, but then you've got him making a film, and he's kind of off the rails, right? And then, of course, the addiction comes back in big form as well. So, we're not only is his relationship with Tony in flux, kind of what happens to the family is also a little in flux too. Yeah. Particularly going into war.
Yeah. If I were to try to
going into war.
If I were to try to go back to when 6A ends, I would probably have like a vaguely weird sense that this isn't going well. But I couldn't have told you what was going to happen next at all, or what they were going to focus on.
Yeah.
Will things stay cool with Phil, but another character becomes a problem in New York? How will we know that it's going to be something with Chris, but we don't know what yet.
Yeah.
Have to see how it happens. There's no possibility that I'm looking away. It's certainly what I come away from 6A with. So, yeah.
Well, with that, I think we should get into our first top three.
Top three.
Wake up, Sal. It's time for a top three. No, I'm just kidding. Don't wake up. Stay sleepy. We're going to get into top three food moments from 6A. We're going to keep the same categories we've kept all along. These are moments that either directly or tangentially involve food. I think sometimes we've been a little liberal with this, but I'll start us off with my number three, and I think the format we've settled on in recent retrospectives is we're going to give the moment, and then we'll see where we have crossovers, and then we'll discuss them in detail. So just list the moment, go around the circle, and on we go. So my number three food moment is Coke in the Fridge from Mr. and Mrs. John Sacramone request. Tony picks a fight with Perry over the slamming of the fridge door.
It's a good one.
And has to exercise and demonstrate his power.
Nice.
I don't have that. And are we doing honorable mentions?
If you have honorable mentions, now would be the time.
Now would be the time.
I have some categories, I have them, some I don't. I have fewer honorable mentions than normal this year.
Sure.
But I definitely have some.
Is Lily next? Lily's going to go? Or?
Sure.
Okay, sure.
I went a little out there with this. You don't have to eat every dish of rigatoni.
Oh, good. Yeah, Melfi, very good.
Really nice.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, a couple quick honorable mentions from Mr. and Mrs. John Sacramone request. Johnny Sack's dad, don't eat that pepper! Honorable mention number 2 from Johnny Cakes at the end when they're in the shop. Juice place coming in. What Jews? And then the chicken goes, what? And like, all that stuff is so great. Number 3, Johnny Cakes. Vito makes Johnny Cakes dinner. Really
Yes.
good food scene. The food that he describes sounds good. I want to have that meal.
Yeah.
And Joe Ganascoli, as I understand it, is a chef.
Yes.
So the scene the part where he's cutting the onions, it's like, dude, this guy knows what he's doing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a contender for me. I'm not... Okay.
That is an honorable mention for me. So he apparently cooks pasta badon, which I don't know what that is, macaroni and potatoes. Real peasant food, he says. A little salad, pork chops, and vinegar peppers. That's the meal? Yeah, sounds pretty good.
Sounds great.
And also it's kind of like a farewell dinner to his new life, because of course he's out of there right after that. That's Mo and Joe, that episode, right? Yeah. Honorable mention for me are just the addictive Johnny Cakes themselves in Live Free or Die. Honorable mention was the one that Paul just mentioned, is his number 3. My number 3 is the wine that is stolen from the Vipers in the ride.
Nice.
Yep.
Nice. My number 2, and it's a recurring food moment, Agent Harris, Mrs. Satriali's.
Nice.
I like the fact that he has gone on to anti-terrorism, but can't seem to bring himself back. And it's not just for the food. I appreciate in the way that it's unpredictable and interesting the relationship between Agent Harris and Tony.
My number 2 is anything they eat in Paris. In Cold Stones.
Number 2 is from members only. They're at Vesuvio, and Silvio says, where did you get this bread? The bread museum? It's just like the bread is old and hard. So, yeah.
My number 2 is Benny burns Artie's hand in a pot of marinara sauce at Vesuvio in Luxury Lounge.
Yep.
That was his saute hand, I believe.
Yes. My number 1...
We're going to have crossover on number 1.
I think so too. My number 1 is from that same episode, Artie cooks the rabbit.
Me too.
Me too.
And mine as well. The rabbit.
Hey!
The rabbit Artie. Yes. That's the number 1 food moment of 6.
Bingo!
All right, so does anyone want to talk about
his
their honorable
grandfather's
mentions before we get to our number 3s? Any honorable mentions you want to discuss or
I
get
thought
right
mine
into?
were hilarious.
All right, so I'll start with my number 3 then. Coke in the Fridge. Nobody else had my 3 and 2, so I'll start with that. Tony having to demonstrate his power. I thought this was a really brilliant move for him, for the show, rather. I hated watching it because he has to victimize this kid, and but you know what? I get it. And I also thought it was a great illustration of Melfi giving him sound advice and him using it to harm somebody to become a better gang leader.
Oh, my number 3, you don't have to eat every dish of rigatoni. I like that, it's not technically a food moment, but a food mention. But I also, I think that it's one of the moments with Tony and Melfi where he actually hears her. And I thought that was really significant.
Yeah.
And I like the line.
Yeah. My number 3 from Mo and Joe when Vito makes Jim dinner. I like that aspect of it, that he's good at it. It sounds really good. As Jordan said, it ends up being a farewell. It's fascinating to me that, for me, the resonance with the Vito storyline is actually like Tony's coma. Vito going to this other space. But Tony's coma underlines that you're not an individual entity with any choice in the matter. Vito is offered this other life, and he chooses to leave it. So there's a lot of problems for me with that story, but as Jordan and Lily have pointed out, there's something to it.
Yeah. My number 3 with the Vipers and the wine. So yes, first I just like the fun of that little caper, and there's kind of this impromptu thing that's going to happen. It's just kind of like sneaky good fun in an already very good episode anyway. But I think more significantly is like there's a little dash of, not even a little dash, overt dash of melancholy in that, because it feels like the kind of thing between Tony and Chris that's happening less and less, their ability to enjoy each other and to have fun with each other. It feels like a little desperate and a little like forced in a way that's observable and good to observe. And then also it is Tony's insensitivity towards Chris's struggles with alcoholism and just the way that compiles. And also I just like that we're going to kind of keep referencing this thing with the Vipers and the wine. It's like their little secret. It's fun, but it's also interesting. Yeah.
Grizzly Adams douchebag. Yeah.
The Vipers, with the Vipers.
My number 2, the recurring Agent Harris Mrs. Satrial's veal parm hero. He caught his parasite, but he can't stop eating at Satrial's. The idea that it adds to the coldness and alienation that Tony feels as a member of modern American life. This idea that there's always now this looming threat of terrorism, and that 9/11 sort of shattered the insulated feeling we had as Americans before that we're all vulnerable to this too, and that despite their brutality and their selfishness, there's something nostalgic about the American gangster in the era of post 9/11 terrorism. And it's not just the food. Of course it's the food. I mean, I'm sure a sandwich at Satrial's is delicious. But I don't know. There's almost a... They don't know that Richie Aprile was carved up in the back of Satrial's one day, but the fact that Harris is consuming food so closely tied to mob violence because what he's been dealing with has been making him Jones for it. There's something very interesting dramatically about that, and I think the relationship that is forged here between Tony and Agent Harris is one of the more interesting developments on the law enforcement front this season.
It ends up being important that he goes there.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Yep, he warns them about Phil at the end.
Yeah, my number 2 was Anything They Eat in Paris, Ro and Carmela. We see a lot of Italian food on the show, obviously. Both Italian-American food and Italian in Italy. But it not only is it really refreshing to see just a totally different cuisine. French food is very romantic and beautiful, especially when it's in Paris. But to see it kind of with Rosalie and Carmela's eyes is really exciting too, just because it's not food they eat really, in New Jersey. So it was just extra special. But I thought just the shots were really beautiful, and anything in Paris. I love that episode.
Yeah, my number 2 is members only, the bread museum thing. It's not profound. I just love it and think it's funny.
Yep.
Also, the
That's
job
valid.
that I have now, I do still work with cheese. I'm a cheese fuck. But we also get fresh bread every day from this great bakery, and every once in a while, they'll overcook it a little bit. It'll be too hard. And to the delight of my coworkers, I'll bang it on something and say, "Where we get this bread? The Bread Museum?" So I got to give the shout out to Silvio Dante, Stevie Van Zandt, and the writers for bringing joy to my life.
Yeah, he fed the soul there.
My number 2, Benny burns Artie's hand in the pot of marinara sauce. Lost a layer of skin. Just a nice, not nice, sorry, I should say a horrifying, dramatic, but also kind of very funny moment in what ends up being a great Artie Bucco episode, and the escalation between him and Benny, really a fun moment, and also ends up leading sort of towards the inspiration for what everyone's number 1 food moment is, right? So something productive comes of all that.
Well, we all had the same number 1, right? So
Yeah.
Artie cooks the rabbit. Definitely, to me, the standout, obvious top food moment in season 1. I mean, if you're not moved watching Artie make the decision to cook that rabbit and pull out his grandfather's notebook and, I don't know what's wrong with you, while the mandolins are going on in the background. After the journey he went on that hour. I don't know, what made you folks pick this one?
Well, for me, part of it was just that you get to see this long-suffering character actually engage with his passion in some way. And also it reminded me of the ways in which he's different from Tony. Like, Artie actually has a skill and a trade that he's, put into something. Like, he can actually give something to people. And there's something beautiful about that. And Tony can only take away, and yet he spends all his time wishing he was more like the wise guys. But Artie is better than them.
And so much of the season and the episode is about materialism and Chris desiring the stuff in the luxury lounge and assaulting Lauren Bacall for her swag bag that Tony wasn't even interested in. And just this idea that after an hour of lamenting these characters who are being petty and awful, but who get to break the rules. And Artie is always the one who has to follow the law, and it doesn't feel like it pays off. But Artie finds out and remembers at the end what his grandfather knew and what every honest person knows in the end, which is that the joy of doing what you love, the work itself, that's the reward. You're not going to get the fancy Mont Blanc pen that the hitmen are marveling over on the way back to Italy. The joy is in the doing of what is right and making that decision.
Yeah, I echo what Jordan said. There's something really beautiful about watching somebody do something they're not only good at, but love to do and have a lot of passion for. And it's just really beautiful to see. I don't have anything more profound than that.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful scene. If we didn't do a food moment category, this would be a contender for moment.
Correct.
Because of how much I love that character and what you guys have said. Also, earlier Lily said that this isn't necessarily the space where you necessarily expect to see a lot of these characters doing these kinds of things. You don't expect an Italian-American show, Italian-American food subculture to have such a striking moment about cooking a rabbit. But it's incredible. It's powerful, it's beautiful, it's not cynical, in spite of the fact that the Mont Blanc pen thing that you pointed out, Chris, is more cynical. I think it's a beautiful moment. It made me think of, why we had food moments on this show because of how intricate and powerful it is, or can be.
Paul, a lot of people don't like rabbit.
That's enough, get out.
I want to get out of here tonight. All right. Let's leverage this. I have a couple of subjects that we're going to talk about, just broad subjects in between.
Leverage away.
In between our top three. But this seems like a good point to get to. I want to talk about two characters who are side characters, recurring characters, supporting characters, as we would call them, who had standout episodes this season. And we can talk about this in any order, but our number one food moment there seems like a great way to go into. I want to talk about Artie Bucco, and I want to talk about Eugene Pontecorvo.
Sure.
Who had the standout storyline in Members Only, where he is trying to get out to Florida, and I thought that was just a great elevation for him. That character's he's been around but hasn't had a spotlight. And Artie, of course, another character who gets his moments in the show but had his own episode in 6A. Anything
Non-stop ass rape, Chris.
I was always a big Artie Bucco fan, and I remember, I'll start with this. My friend and I who watched the show together, Bucco was one of our favorite characters, and when the trailer for season 6A dropped, after season 5 and 6A, it was like the HBO promo, there was one clip in 6A promo of Artie ripping the tablecloth off the thing, and we jumped out of our seats like, yeah, Bucco's gonna fuck some shit up this season. And you know what? This episode delivered on the promise. Sometimes they would cut the previews in a way that would make you think certain things were more explosive than they were.
Sure.
But this one really delivered. Bucco went over and fucking beat up Benny, and just another victim of Benny Fazio, criminal mastermind. And then, of course, the opening of 6A surprised me as well, because this Eugene character, most known up until this point for smashing Paulie, little Paulie with the Snapple bottle in season 5. So yeah, he's just one of these goons always hanging around the construction site in the April crew. But man, they really gave him a chance to shine and show some range before they wrote him off in a pretty epic fashion. Most of the supporting characters didn't get this kind of write-off. Good for him, he maximized it. Thoughts on any of these things?
I've said before that I think Vito is the least interesting gangster character on the show. That includes Gene Pontecorvo. And Gene Pontecorvo's spotlight is one episode long. I think it's incredible what he did.
Why open the season that way?
That's a great question.
You know,
It'd be hard for me to say without spoilers.
But also, it should be noted, again, without spoilers, or working to avoid spoilers, that kind of episode, where it focuses pretty intensely on a character, and maybe that character's relationship to Tony we should see as a sign of things to come.
Anything about Artie?
Oh, I have plenty to say about Artie. I mean, we just talked about it a little bit with the rabbit moment, but you know what's, and I think Jordan, you might have just said this a little bit, but what's beautiful about Luxury Lounge from Artie's perspective is he has the harder time in the short run, but ultimately we see through this rabbit moment that like he's really the one who's winning, right? The big losses the capital F family has, they're always at a funeral. You know, it's life or death, right? Gene tries to get out and do it in an honest way where he's negotiating and doing everything right. And, or tries to do it right. And, you know, it ends up being very, very bad for him, right? And completely unavoidable. And so as much as like, I really connect with like, can anybody just follow the rules? Ultimately, he's got it good. He has his family, he has his business, he has his craft, he has his skill, he has his passion, and Artie's the one who's got it good. You know?
I so agree.
Members,
Absolutely.
when we recorded on Members Only, we called the episode Wheel of Fortune.
Yeah.
Yes.
Both of these characters are caught up in it. Right? Eugene Pontecorvo, we saw how that worked. Tony tries to tell Artie, hey, it's a business, you gotta do what you can when things are lean to keep your dick up, that sort of thing. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it the way Lily pointed it out, but I think we can see that Artie handles the lean time in the right way. He gets through.
I also like that, you know, for Eugene, and I think we observed this pretty well on our coverage of Members Only. Eugene's story is kind of Tony's story. It's a microcosm of Tony's story, right? Eugene wants the things that Tony would want to be happy, but it's also the things that any of us would want to be happy. It's like you want to be well-respected, and you want to have work that matters, but you also want a family that's happy, and you want, you know, if you have a son, you want a son that is doing well and is making you proud and who you have a good relationship with, and you want to have options, and you want to have, like, upward mobility, and you want to have a dream with your wife that maybe you can have this thing realized. But as Lily put, like, because they are, you know, in the capital F family, right, and because there's a lot of evil involved, right, they can't succeed in the same way that Artie can playing an honest game. You know, like, yeah, Artie can take some heavy losses, and I guess the worst thing that could happen to him are some of the things that already happened to him. He could get divorced, maybe. He could lose his restaurant, maybe, but he's not going to be killed, you know?
The feds aren't going to break up his daughter's wedding.
Right, exactly.
The things that really matter.
Yeah, so it's that level of risk isn't there, and as a result, Artie can be happier about some things, I think. I think you're right, Lily. I think you put it really well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I also think it's great. I actually have warm feelings seeing Artie and Charmaine work as a team and see how they can work well as a team. Oftentimes the drama comes from how at certain moments it's not working out well. But here we really see her stick by him and do some of the smart moves.
Yeah.
That's really great. I like seeing that.
I love Charmaine at this point. She comes off, and deliberately so, this is not a knock on the characterization or the writing, as abrasive and nagging in season 1. But when you really get the full scope of it and you see, A, how they work together when Tony's not directly involved, and B, the kinds of decisions Artie could be prone to if he didn't have this angel on his shoulder.
Yeah.
It's really something. She's a great character, and Artie needs her. It's really, really good. Great work from both these two actors. Who knows, maybe one or both of them will come up when we talk about that top 3. But I want to move on here. Let's have this conversation, get it done. We talked a lot about it when we were actually recording the episode, so we'll see how far into the weeds we get. But we can't talk about a 6A retrospective without doing Vito, New Hampshire, homosexual gangsters, and the resolution in Cold Stone's Another character who was elevated, but it wasn't just a one-off episode. This was a major story thread. Surely we knew in season 5 when Vito was outed that this was going to come back. You don't drop a nugget like that and just never touch it again. But did it work? Did it not work? We've had arguments about this. We've had discussions. What does it mean in the big picture of things? And 6A. It spends a significant chunk of time on this. Was it needed? Was it necessary? How could it have been better? Or was it sufficient now that we've seen the big picture?
Yeah, so just in the way you framed it, was it needed? So no, but also nothing is really needed. It was included.
Sure. And
now that it has been included, and now it's fair for discussion, I guess we can say, hey, how does this impact some of the bigger themes on this show? I think where we maybe look on this and reflect on it a little bit poorly is just that, socially things have changed since this show aired, right? We wouldn't see these things presented this way now. And we're talking about these things differently than they would have been talked about 20 years ago. That said, I'm glad there was some LGBT representation on the show, that there was a character who had this, even if it was a struggle, even if he was maligned for it, even if he was punished for it, just to give us some reflection of what that is like in this lifestyle, but also the hypocrisy of lifestyle, right? So much of the show is that, these men have an oath, but they violate it every which way. This is another example of that, that this character does not have the freedom to be himself, and that there is so much hate towards him for this, and he pays for it with his life.
It's a sad irony that this actor is not up to James Gandolfini level, and that's fair to say for most actors in the world. So I don't feel like I'm insulting Joe Gandolfini by saying that, because Vito is the other character this season who is left asking, who am I, where am I going? And the theme of identity and trying to find his true self. I think the allegory of him in the Fit Club was put in at the last moments of that episode for a reason. This is a character who was trying to get to be his more authentic self. I'm a believer, generally speaking, in the idea, and I don't know how my fellow artists here will feel about this, that there's no real such thing as a bad idea. Everything is execution. And the idea of a gay gangster having to run off and hide and be persecuted for that and making decisions that he did and coming back the way he did, I think some episodes and some moments it was executed well. Others maybe perhaps not so well. Overall, big picture, I thought it worked for the season. It certainly got the characters around the Vito situation where they needed to be. And I thought that while there were some low points that maybe didn't do it for you, I thought the high points were worth it in the end.
Yeah, I too am glad it was in there. I echo what Jordan says. No, of course it didn't have to be there. I'm a very big proponent of we can't judge things with a modern lens too harshly. Like I just don't think that it's fair. And I too am really glad that it's there. I think it's a really compelling question of what would happen if one of these guys were gay, right? And I think that question gets answered. I think the parts in the middle, he's not a great actor. It's fine. Everything else around him was pretty cool. I liked and I know this was my point when we did, I think, Live Free or Die, but I like the kind of rom-com fantasy he experiences in New Hampshire. I think it's about as believable as going to hell and having ghosts visit you when talking to a medium. So, I think that believability in New Hampshire is as believable as all the other things that we've determined are not capital R realism. So, I'm overall...
Well, it's as real as, to exactly your point, it's as real as Costa Mesa in Tony's Coma, and both are journeys of self-discovery for these characters.
In some ways it is another Costa Mesa.
Strange identities in strange places, right?
Yeah, of course course there's not going to be an entire fire department in Podunk, New Hampshire full of gay men. That is absolutely bananas.
And to the fire department currently listening to our episode, hey.
But
And I'm also going to say that several of our listener mails touch on the Vito storyline in some interesting ways. So
that's exciting.
I'm excited. We'll talk more about this. But Paul, did you want to add anything?
About the Vito storyline?
Yeah.
No, I'm good. So give me a second. Where am I?
Don't feel like you have to.
So the Vito storyline, there's an interesting thing. At the end of Mayhem, when Tony's come out of the coma, you guys remember the song that plays us out?
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere Over the Rainbow.
Yeah.
The Wizard of Oz. Similarly, American fable, fairy tale, another space. The Wizard of Oz is also very important in what community? The gay community. The gay community.
Friend of Dorothy.
Friend of Dorothy. And I always thought that was kind of a gag. It's not a gag. It's actually kind of important to them. About found family, about acceptance, that sort of thing. I think there's maybe even something interesting there. I agree with you, Chris. I think it's the execution. This is a show that, not unlike... Sal, I don't like talking about this story either. Look, it's tough right now, I know.
I'm gonna go get his chair. I'll be right back.
So... Sure. So, in the late 90s, Chris and I know, there was a big movement in wrestling that changed it about attitude. It's got to have attitude. And that's what The Sopranos always had. It always had attitude. Feech LaManna, Richie Aprile, Ralph Cifaretto, these characters have attitude. And unfortunately, Joe Ganascoli, the way he plays Vito, is unforgivably and irretrievably mid. That's the energy that you always get from him, including in a forbidden love story. That's a disaster, dramatically, I think. So that's the way I feel about it. I agree with you guys that it doesn't disrupt 6A, really. 6A remains addictively watchable and fun, and it informs other stories. It's just, I think it was probably always going to be a bit of a hard sell, this storyline for me, and I think it was a mistake to do it with this actor.
It also provides an extra layer for Phil Leotardo that I think is really interesting.
Well, yes, correct. It says a lot about the characters directly and tangentially involved. We're going to get to Phil, but I think it's just about time for another top three. Top three. We're going to go to music cues. Top three music cues. Lily, would you like to start us off?
Sure. I have I have Cold Stones As Time Goes By.
For your number three?
Yep.
Paul?
Music cues. Honorable mention is Midnight Rider from The Ride, after Tony and Chris have finished the robbery and they ride off. And number three, from members only, Comes Love by Artie Shaw. Tony gets shot by Uncle Junior.
Honorable mention, Moby's When It's Cold, I Like to Die, in Join the Club. This is Kevin Finnerty, returning to his hotel room there. We'll talk about it. My number three is, of course, Seven Souls, Laswell and Burroughs.
My number three.
Yeah.
William Burroughs, Seven Souls.
Yeah.
My number two is Members Only, Dreaming by Blondie.
Nice. Love that track. My number two, Fred Neil, Dolphins, is the name of the track. Chris relapses at the feast in The Ride.
My number two, Chris relapses into hard drug usage set to Fred Neil's Dolphins, The Ride.
Number two, Artie Shaw, Comes Love. Junior shoots Tony. In members only.
Weird. My number one, Comes Love, Junior Shoots Tony.
My number one, Join the Club, American Girl by Tom Petty. Carmela talks to Tony.
My number one, American Girl, Join the Club, Tom Petty.
High fucking five.
I am so mad that one got by me. However, I stand by my number one choice. Fred Neil's Dolphins in The Ride.
All right, so we got some overlap across different
Awesome.
rankings.
Yeah. All right. So, Lily, you had a different number 3. Start there.
Yeah, as time goes by, happens. It's the episode closer, like the. My brain doesn't work anymore. The credits, the final credits song in Cold Stones, and it's right after Vito has been murdered, and the guy from the Fit Club says, "Hey, I recognize this person." And it's just, we're seeing this throughout the season. It's still the same old story, a fight for love and glory, right? And it's just, as time goes by, we're making the same kind of going round and round again. Just thought it's a really beautiful song to use in that moment.
So I had an honorable mention, great moment, just as the robbery ends at the beginning of the ride, and Tony and Chris drive off, you get Midnight Rider, great mood to it. And number 3, it's funny at first when Uncle Junior is upset and confused. Who's down there? And Tony says, Artie Shaw. And they're playing Comes Love. Comes Love, nothing can be done. And Tony gets gut shot. And then as the song is still melodically playing, Tony's like screaming out for Uncle Junior to call the police and trying to get to the phone. It's incredible. It's incredible.
I'm going to add to this because it's my number 2. There are certain songs that have been ruined by this show. This is one of them. I cannot hear this song without thinking of Tony bleeding from the gut, ripping the phone out of the wall, Uncle June, call 911, the terrific acting, how horrible he looks, the fact that it's just droning on and on with the boiling pasta water underneath. Just an incredible moment. It was one of yours too, Jordan, right? That was
no, not for me. Not that.
You
one.
had an honorable mention.
It was my number 1, but there's
It's your
nothing
number
to
1.
say differently than Paul or Chris. So let's keep it moving.
Well, my number 3, which I think was also Chris's number 3, is Seven Souls, which is what we don't quite open with that song. We eventually get to that song in members only, right?
There's one
it's almost
scene,
the opening.
No, there is one scene
Prior to that.
where Agent Harris gives the quote, or the agent, his partner says, "No one ever went broke underestimating the taste of the American public." They pull over, Harris vomits, and then the song.
The music's like already going.
Okay, so, so there it is. I mean, I love it. I think I spent a lot of time rewinding and playing to see if the different 7 parts actually lined up with anything, and they don't exactly line up perfectly. Like Ba the Heart, often treacherous. They do a flash of like Ray Curto, who we know is a rat, which I think is funny, but they don't all exactly line up. But actually, that's fine. The words in that song, the lyric melody of the poem are so profound, and you feel like, oh, okay, it's not resonating in this moment, it's going to resonate throughout this whole season.
Yes.
It's a terrific opener, and also I love it. It accompanies just checking in on all of these characters. Where are we in the web of all this?
Yes. Musically, the tone of it is very unsettling and jarring, especially after that first opening scene. It's like, whoa, we're going to get something very uncomfortable here this year. And then, yes, lyrically, it touches on themes of soul, who you are, the different layers to the soul.
Right, and sort of this allusions to the Egyptians, the afterlife.
Yes.
We're going cosmic. Right, we're going metaphysical this season.
Yeah, no. So I'm right with you for all those same reasons. My number 2, Artie Shaw, Comes Love. We talked about it, and okay.
My number 2 is Dreaming by Blondie.
Oh,
Happens when Eugene's just done the hit, and he's like wipes blood off his face, right? And dreaming is free. It's like, he's got this money. He's giving it up. He's giving some of it up to Tony in the hopes that he can get out to Florida and retire. And that is not one of the 2 ways mobsters die.
no. It's almost too on the nose, but it's actually perfect when he just smears the blood on the map of New Jersey.
Oh, yeah.
New Jersey is blood. New Jersey is death.
Yeah, dreaming is free.
It's
just a really beautiful moment.
It really is. That didn't even make my list. It almost did, that song. I still stole that. After hearing it on this, I stole it to play out Act 1 of a play I directed. The first lyric is, when you met me in the restaurant, and the play that I was directing takes place in a restaurant. But the resonant line here, as Lily said, is gotta be dreaming is free.
Yeah. Paul and I had the same number 2 and 1. So before we get there, did anybody else have one that wasn't one of those 2?
No, sir.
My number 1 was Dolphins, so we can talk about that.
So
and
Dolphins is our number 2. So let's do that one, I guess.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That scene sucks, right?
Yeah.
Unforgettable. The shots of that street fair, Chris losing it, the dog, the shot of the moon with the airplane, that was a complete fucking accident.
Yeah.
That's how great art happens, is often by accident mixed with genius.
The sun is coming up and they're shutting the lights off.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
so bleak.
Oh, the lights going off as Chris is just like fucking bombed out of his mind.
It's so bleak, and also like you feel, or at least you know what, I should speak from my own experience. I feel like there's no coming back for him from that point on.
I think that's what it's meant to make you
It feels
feel.
that way.
In the lyrics, this whole world will never change. I mean, fuck. It's rough, but it's a haunting melody. One that I
Do you ever think of me?
Yeah.
Is one of the lyrics. I thought of Adriana.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
oh brutal,
You're so
brutal.
smart.
I done it again, Sal.
But it's just a gorgeous piece of cinema, and I thought the music was so appropriate and perfect. Of course, who the fuck ever heard of this song?
It's one of the gifts of The Sopranos, isn't it?
Yeah,
That you
yeah.
get new tracks. No
Holy
matter what your
shit.
taste is,
Yeah,
you will
exactly.
get new tracks.
Correct. And you folks had a wonderful number one that I am.
Yeah, Paul, do you want to lead the American Girl discussion?
This is halfway an excuse to have this moment and not have it in my moments.
Yeah.
Moments, because it's such a good moment. I think it's the high point for Carmela in the season. There's one lyric, God, it's so painful to have something so close and yet so far out of reach. And so I think for Carmela to be right there with Tony, but where is he? Is he coming back? Where is he going? That stuff. And the image of an American girl and Carmela wondering, I think, where she might fit if Tony doesn't wake up, but also trying to, communicate her love for him, as she outright says, is such an incredible moment. It's underlined by the song. It feels so credible that it's actually like an upbeat song in a lot of ways that she would try to play to get him, to remind him of the time when they were probably young newlyweds when that song came out. It's just very real to me. Maybe that's the thing, is that it's so real, that scene.
Yeah, Paul did an amazing job just now. I'd only add that on the actor side of things, obviously this is one of the great Edie Falco moments in the series. She is an unbelievable actor. I don't have the words for how good Edie Falco is in this moment and in this season. I will say that this was one of a few moments in this series that brought me to real tears.
Yes.
While I was watching it, even recalling it now, because it is so real. And her delivery of it is just so profound. I love that. I love the way she touches him, interacts with him, and she's just acting to air. I mean, it's just her. It's just all powerful monologue.
Very well said. I'm not going to add anything to that, but I will use it to move into our next category. Let's talk about Carmela this season and her journey through 6A. It was an interesting one, and you know what's interesting? Obviously, my feelings toward Edie Falco are godly. She's a once-in-a-lifetime talent. Her work this season and on this character is incredible. I have to say, not that I don't understand why she's made the decisions she's made, especially after her journey in Season 5, trying to get away from Tony and failing. But I don't leave with good feelings on Carmela at the end of this season. I don't like the compromise she makes in the pursuit of truth in Adriana to continue. You know, it's like all Tony has to do is get that spec house up and running, and she throws that card right in the... Now, I understand why she has to make that compromise, but there are moments this season where we see how far Carmela has had to come in dealing with the practical reality of her situation. This is not the same Carmela that was crying to Father Phil in college. This is the monologue. I'm thinking of the monologue she gives to Melfi. The minute I met Tony, I knew who that guy was, and she would cry to her priest, but that was bullshit. Very telling of where she is, her mindset on all this, coming to terms with who she and Tony are. And I have to think there's a part of her that if the situation was different, maybe she could have been maybe she could have been a gangster in her own right, because the way she compartmentalizes Adriana at the end there is some frightening dark shit, and just smiling, yeah, we do have a beautiful house. Yeah. But, Edie Falco knocks it out of the park. Any thoughts on Carmela's journey this season?
I'll reference Cold Stones, and this is a good excuse for me to not have to put it in quotes, but, she's with Rosalie, she's having these great realizations in Paris, again, surrounded by art and culture and all this beauty. She's getting contemplative, she's becoming existential and philosophical. She says, you know what's strange? When you go to a place you've never been before, it's like all the people were imaginary until you got there. It's like until you saw them, they never existed, and you never existed to them. Rosalie says, I don't know, maybe you're more of a philosophical person than I am. Carmela says, it just made me think, that's all. It's the same when you die. Life goes on without you, like it does in Paris when we're not here. And this is such a core of existential philosophy of what does it mean to be alive? What is our purpose here? What are any of us doing? And I think she's afloat in the same way these other characters are this season, in the same way as Christopher and Vito and Tony, who are the other major ones that are going through this cycle of emptiness and trying to find belonging and meaning and purpose. She has the same sad journey as you just outlined, right? She is given this great quote-unquote gift when Tony returns to her, but she's still not feeling entirely fulfilled in herself. She, Meadow has moved away from her. That's huge for her this season, right? She's seeking purpose, life, etc., travels to Paris, sees things in Paris, but is not fulfilled by them. It kind of just presents more emptiness, more searching, more questions, as dabbling with philosophy will do. Philosophy is like a drug of its own, right? You come back home, these questions remain. This thing is nettling her. Adriana, what happened to her? Can I do any good here? She starts to pursue. Tony sees she's serious, and the simple distraction of the spec house is enough, right? Why? Because we all return back to our own habits. Even when we're presented with the opportunity to do our highest good, do we revert to our own habits? That's the unfortunate case of being human. Yeah.
Well, her addiction is being safe.
Yeah.
Having her future solidified, and the spec house represents that.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't ultimately matter what happens to Adriana if she is not also safe when the inevitable happens. She knows she's pushing it away. It's not worth, because the drug of choice is security.
Yeah, Carmela's got an interesting season, as you guys have stated. It seems a little upside down. It's more intense up top. And then, not that it's not interesting at the end, but as Jordan outlined there, it's a little more philosophical. I agree with you, Chris. I don't feel great about where she ends up, about this particular compromise or deal with the devil. And there's a few characters like that. As I was looking over this season, some of the stuff like Melfi's like, oh, so this is part of your new philosophy. I salute it then. And I was like, you know what? Fuck you too. Like, what are you really doing? What are we really doing? We'll get to that too.
Yeah. We're going to talk about therapy.
Meadow, I think everything with Finn, yes, she went out there with him, but the last in-depth scene that we saw with them was not good, and we saw them pulling away from each other. So, and Meadow does not want to compromise on her family. Understandably, they all just went through this intense thing together with Tony getting shot. They feel closer to him because they didn't lose him. So I think it's a fascinating place for Carmela to be. I don't feel great at the end, but again, can't look away. Got to see what's going to happen next.
And Carmela is a gangster.
Yeah.
The wives are gangsters.
Yes.
Are you kidding? Like, let's not forget the regot pie moment.
No, never.
Never.
Oh, yeah.
Let me ask you this. Here's just a theoretical here, because I like theoreticals. Let's say she finds out the actual truth about Adriana. Does that break the bargain for her?
No, I don't think so, actually. I don't think so.
It might ruin her and Christopher, but I don't know that it would break her and Tony. Anyway,
I don't think there is a scenario where she would give everything up. I think that the comfort, again, the security of her nice, it is a nice house, it is a beautiful house.
You have a beautiful home.
Yeah.
We do.
Maybe if, and this is total conjecture, the show never does this, if something happened to Meadow or AJ and it was Tony's fault, right?
Yeah, that
then
might do
maybe.
it, yeah.
Then like they are killed as a result of something going on with him and another
Sure.
gangster. Then maybe. But Adriana, I don't know. It's too far removed. She'd be upset. Tony would say something. I could just see this going on. You know.
Yeah. Especially because of why.
Yeah.
Because let's not forget that, like...
I think she would find a way to blame Christopher instead of Tony. You know.
Yeah, but also
we
I
would
think
live with it
her
that
being
way.
a rat would have been enough if she knew enough about the truth.
That's true too.
You don't do that.
Yeah.
I don't think... I think that would have been the reason Carmela could justify it if she knew that much. But I think I think that, and of course we're talking in hypotheticals. I think if she knows that Tony had her killed, she knows that she ratted, and I think that's the It's the same justification of the capital F family, right?
Yes. I agree.
It's not like she doesn't know Tony kills people.
Oh no, she knows.
You know. All right. Well, just interesting food for thought. Speaking of interesting, here's another character who had a screen time wise a diminished role this season, but looming impact. We have to talk about Uncle Junior and where he's at. And this would have been a completely different conversation seasons ago. Junior had a lot going on, different things, the trial, the cancer. But this is where the show starts dipping into pitch black territory. There is nothing hopeful, optimistic, or good down the pike for Junior at all. There's no light at the end of this tunnel.
Disintegration.
It's Tony very bleakly Tony as Kevin Finnerty very bleakly describes Alzheimer's as you're a Smurf for 10 or 15 years and then you die shitting in your pajamas. It's hard not to think of Junior looking for his teeth, and I had a banana in there, and nothing he says at any point, just staring at the Tic Tacs while they're trying to get him out of the state facility, the hand turkey. What do we make of this? This was a vital character that Jordan has adequately stated many times throughout our season. Perhaps should have died in a much different way long ago.
Still true.
Was not meant to reach this age.
Totally a vital character. Wheel of Fortune wise, just using that lens, this was the character that started our series with basically the highest status. Now he's brought down to basically the lowest status. He's a mental patient who, is in the home or whatever, and everyone thinks he's insane. No one will trust him with anything. We have characters who are, in the case of Vito, escaping to some other place. In Tony's case, escaping to another state of being. Junior's experiencing both those things at the same time. He's in a place that's totally unfamiliar. He's not who he is. No one is who he thinks they are, right? So he's in a constant state of purgatory. He's living the Kevin Finnerty life for real. So it's, he has the ultimate nightmare of that. So now it's metaphysically, he's in the purgatory for actual real.
Yeah.
So it's cool to reflect through that. I think Lily said in a previous episode, it might even have been our most previous episode, our Kaisha episode, Junior's a bad guy. So he's kind of getting what he deserves, but also we feel bad for him.
No one deserves
We
this.
don't feel like anyone deserves this.
Yeah.
So, it's tough.
I mean, let's think holistically or hypothetically on this. Maybe there's a justification for a horrible pedophile to get the death penalty, but I don't want to see it.
Sure, yeah.
Tony in season 4 says something about how for most and it's repeated, I think, for most gangsters it ends one of two ways, dead or in prison. Apparently there is one fate that's worse.
Yeah.
Which is this disintegration that Jordan eloquently stated out, we're seeing all these different things fall apart, the place that he's fallen to, the perpetual purgatory, it seems.
Yeah. And in Junior's world, Pussy Malanga is still alive, Karen, Bobby's wife, is still alive, he has no concept of time, place, who is anyone. That's a nightmare.
He thinks that he's maybe actually bribing that orderly
right, yeah.
at the end.
Yeah.
One hand washes the other.
And he won't even remember he gave him the money 30 seconds from now. And who knows how much was in there, because don't forget, that was Bobby's goodbye money. That was Bobby's, I'm set up with Tony, don't ever call me again money.
Yeah.
And Bobby loved Junior. He described feeling love toward Junior at multiple points in the series. So that's the best he's getting from someone who loved him. Rough end for this character. It's not clear what remains to be seen of him in 6B at this point, or if we're even going to get him. But it's hard to imagine what that could be, based on what we're given. That could be meaningful with this guy. So he may have trouble remembering certain moments in his life, but we don't have trouble remembering moments from season 6A. So we're going to get to our top 3. Yeah! Top 3 quotes.
Quotations.
Yeah.
No lack of great quotes in season
these are
6A.
tough. What's funny is we can do a top 3 quotes for each episode, so I just try to spread
Seriously.
them out.
No, seriously. Paul, you want to start us?
I'd love to. All right, I have too many honorable mentions. One from Mayhem. Ghostbusters, another fucking money machine. Second honorable mention, also from Mayhem. Long story short, he gets put back together by science, or maybe it's supernatural. Honorable mention 3.
That's my number 1.
From fleshy part of the thigh, Aunt Dottie, Mom Dottie, I was a bad girl. Honorable mention from an episode, I can't remember the name. Talk to your mother about this shit.
Mo and Joe.
Okay, Kaisha honorable mention the entire sit down. I don't want to call it a sit down because of the negative
My number 1's in there.
Number 3.
Multiple of mine are his honorable mentions.
Okay, number 3. I'm cheating because I have to read all these different parts. Is in Live Free or Die. Patsy Parisi, Polly Walnuts, Carlo, Tony, Silvio, all them. I could care less, basically. Yeah? Maybe you're a flambe. Fucking nauseating. It's up to me, I drag Vito behind my car right now. Oh, will you take it easy over there, fucking Judge Roy Bean? Think about it, though, Tone. Sudden weight loss? AIDS? Nobody's got AIDS. I don't want to hear that word in here again.
That was number 3 for you? Okay. I have 3 honorable mentions. First honorable mention, fuck. That's Ben Kingsley Luxury Lounge. Honorable mention, Christopher says, Allegra, ain't that a cold medicine? Paulie says, means happy in Italian. Chris, the fuck's that got to do with a cold medicine? From Mr. and Mrs. John Sacrimony request. Honorable mention, nurse, Corrado, don't you have nothing? You could make a hand turkey. For Christmas? Fucking idiot. That's Junior from Kaisha. And final honorable mention, Silvio. Michael Myers is an escaped mental patient. Jason and Freddy, different kind of movie. That's his early notes on Cleaver in Mayhem. My number 3. You know my feelings. Every day is a gift. But does it always have to be a pair of socks? Tony, the ride.
My honorable mention comes from the... I have one honorable mention. It comes from Mayhem. Have a cookie, you're delirious. Because it's not only hilarious line, well delivered by Tony Sirico, but it is also one that can be applied outside of
everyday
life to everyday life. My number 3 quote is from the episode Johnny Cakes. Patsy Parisi. It's over for the little guy.
My honorable mention is every day is a gift, but it doesn't have to be a pair of socks.
There you go.
My other honorable mention, Artie Bucco, warm and convivial host. And my number 3 is, I'm just another victim of Benny Fazio, criminal mastermind.
Nice.
Luxury Lounge has so many good ones.
So good.
Speaking of which, number 2, Luxury Lounge. Tony and Artie. Well, listen, the other day I was driving along thinking about your little problem. How about promotion? Coupon, 2 for 1. Artie, 2 for. Well, you mean like you get a free spaghetti and meatballs, you bring another cheap gum douchebag in here? How about an early bird special? Salad wagon? This is a fine dining establishment. I'll give it back to the bank before I turn it into a fucking IHOP.
It's totally insane.
Number 2. We could have it all, Phil. Plenty for everybody. Tony, Kaisha.
My number 2 has already been spoken. You know my feelings. Every day's a gift. It just doesn't have to be a pair of socks. Tony Soprano.
My number 2, people only see what you allow them to see.
Ooh.
Yeah, what's your honorable mention, Sal? We didn't ask you.
Number 1, join the club. Scene between the government agent and Junior Soprano. What are these? A watch and a pencil. Repeat the following sentence. No ifs, ands, or buts. I'll do it if I fucking feel like it. Take your ultimatums and stick them in your ass. No. Repeat the sentence. What is this person talking about?
Yes. Hell of an exchange.
My number one is Christopher in Mayhem. Paul had it in his honorable mentions. I will do the full quote. You hear this dude 100% well. He's a bad boy, huh? With that lingo, real fucking dark character. My idea is Saw meets Godfather 2. Proven track record, both genres. Young wise guy assassin gets betrayed by his people. They whack him, leave his body parts in dumpsters all around the city. Long story short, he's put back together by science. Or maybe it's supernatural. And he gets fucking payback on everybody who fucked him over, including the cunt he was engaged to. She was getting porked by his boss the night the hero was killed. We'll have a meeting tomorrow. We'll hear what you fleshed out before we go to a script. Bing, 2:30. Don't make me come looking for you.
There you go. That's a pitch if ever I heard one. My number one. Hey, Sal, cool it.
Oh!
Don't say nothing, Sal. Don't say nothing, Sal.
He knows.
You were spotted, Sal. So don't go pulling my taffy. We're almost done, Sal. You hanging in there, buddy?
We're gonna go to bed.
We're gonna go to bed in just like 2 minutes. My number one quote is from Cold Stones. We worry so much, sometimes it feels like that's all we do, but in the end, it just gets washed away. Carmela.
I'll end with my number one, truly profound. A pint of blood costs more than a gallon of gold.
Oh, Carmine.
Classic.
Thank you all so much for joining us for part 1 of our 6A retrospective. We're going to be back with our next episode for part 2. We're going to do listener mail, a lot more great conversation, and some spicy top 3s. Our top 3 episodes, top 3 moments, top 3 characters and performances. You don't want to miss it. We'll be back very soon with our retrospective part 2. Thank you so much.